We're in downtown Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. This was once, about 100 years ago, one of the richest cities in the world, and you could tell as you walk around the faded grandeur of a once great city, but this is now a desperate country. Its economy is in shambles, has been for a long time. Argentina famously defaulted on its debt more than 20 years ago. But now hyperinflation has made this country genuinely desperate. You see it when you have dinner here in restaurants and people pull out bricks of local currency, the peso, to pay. It feels like Weimar or Zimbabwe, but it's not. This is a developed country that's moving backwards at high speed. And because of the frustration that has built up among the population, particularly among poor people, a man called Javier Milei is poised to become its next president. He's a former soccer star, a goalie, a performer in a Rolling Stones cover band, and a libertarian economist. He's not a libertarian in the traditional American sense. He wouldn't fit in at the Cato Institute, which has attacked him for liking Donald Trump too much. He's a libertarian in the traditional sense. He believes people should have the maximum amount of freedom they can be given, which is a lot, much more than they now get in Argentina. He has moved from basically nowhere in the last several years to become maybe the most famous person in this country. The election is next month in October, and once again it seems like he's likely to win. The reception he's gotten from the press in the West, particularly in the United States, the New York Times, the Washington Post, also the Financial Times, has been hostile, to put it mildly. They describe him as a far-right figure, like he's a Nazi. Is he? We sat down with him at great length just a moment ago, here right across from the president's mansion, the pink house that he hopes to soon occupy, to find out what he's like. He didn't seem very radical. Continuing what they're now doing in Argentina seems radical, in fact insane. But judge for yourself. Here he is. Thanks so much for joining us, or for letting us come and interview you here in Buenos Aires. So why do you think, from your perspective, you've become a man with no political background, so popular so quickly in this country?
From my standpoint, there are two ways of explaining this popularity. One has to do with my personal background. Over the course of my life, I've been a soccer player and sang in a rock band. I'm also an economist. And I think that combination makes for an attractive television production. The other important way to explain this popularity is because of my ideas. Argentina is a country that has embraced socialist ideas for the last 100 years. So liberalism is a natural form of rebellion against the system. And rebellion is always led by youth. When they look at me, they see someone talking about liberalism and rebelling against the status quo.
I don't understand how people with power in Argentina could support the status quo, given that your inflation rate is up there with Lebanon and Zimbabwe and other countries that aren't real countries. But your country is beautiful, abundant natural resources, intelligent, well-educated population, and yet its economy is in shambles. So clearly the system isn't working. How could anyone support that?
The issue is that Argentina began to embrace socialist ideas over 100 years ago. The analogy of frogs in a pot of water is useful here. When you turn up the heat slowly, the frogs don't realize it until the time comes, and when they try to jump out, it's too late and they end up dead. Argentina's embrace of socialist ideas began with an idea that seems attractive, but is actually a terrifying way to operate an economic system. The idea that where there is a need, there is a right. It's a problem because there can be infinite needs, but someone always has to pay for those rights. And the resources for that are finite. That sparks a conflict between infinite needs and finite resources. In the liberalist view, this conflict is easy to resolve through economic freedom and private property. This is a natural mechanism to resolve this tension in a society, but the socialists don't much like the invisible hand. They prefer the claws of the state, and they hide it behind the discourse of social justice. This sort of social justice is deeply unjust because it's premeditated by unequal treatment under the law and preceded by a robbery.
I didn't fully appreciate the degree to which the Argentinian government had embraced fringe, academic, American-style social justice. A businessman told me at lunch today that people who identify as transgender pay lower taxes. 2019, you had a Ministry of Women and Diversity created in this country for the first time. What does that ministry do?
In theory, it is supposed to deal with women's issues, but when you look for the results, you find there aren't any, just writing songs.
Are women happier here?
No. No, because there are no real results. Just painting a park bench red or writing a song doesn't fix the conditions or address the problems that women face. In fact, one of the most important achievements of liberalism is equality under the law. And then this kind of ministry. Why isn't there a ministry of men? If there is true equality under the law, what we need is to enforce the law, not to create a ministry of women. It's based on a premise that is totally false. For example, they say that there is a glass ceiling for women and women earn less than men, and that all businessmen are pigs who only care about making money. If that were the case, and all businessmen are pigs who only care about making money, then why aren't all offices swarming with women? They should be full of women. But when you look, it's fairly even and proportional to the population. If you look beyond the averages, you will find that it's a matter of the decisions that men and women are making as they choose their professions. And if you correct for profession and for line of work, then pay is actually even. And the truth is, all of the regulations and restrictions that these organizations like the Ministry of Women promote, all they do is create positive discrimination, affirmative action. That's discrimination. And I think it's absolutely offensive to women because it means treating them as lesser beings, which is truly abhorrent. And it also sparks counterproductive behavior among women, and this hurts women in the end. It's the same old story. All state action causes more harm than what it is supposed to correct. For example, they tried to fix a problem with rents in Argentina. They passed a law on rentals. Now we are worse off than before. They tried to fix the problem of hunger, and now there is more hunger. They tried to fix the problem of poverty, and now there's more poverty. They tried to fix the lack of employment, and now there's more unemployment. Every time the state intervenes, it is a violent action that harms the right to private property, and in the end, limits our freedom. The end result is much worse than how things were before. It was always clear that the Ministry of Women would only hurt women, except those who are state employees.
You oppose abortion. Why?
Because as someone who believes in liberalism, I'll say libertarian liberal, because in English, the word liberal means something different. So let me say, as a libertarian, we believe that liberalism entails the unrestricted respect for the lives of others, rooted in a principle of non-aggression and the defense of life, liberty, and property. And if we cleave these ideas of liberty, one of the most fundamental aspects is to defend the right to life. Beyond that, there is a scientific justification to be had. It's the fact that life begins at conception. It's at that very instant that a new being begins to evolve with its own unique DNA. While it's true that women have the right to their own bodies, the child in a woman's womb is not her body. That child is not her body. That makes abortion a murder, enabled and aggravated by a power imbalance against a child that has no way to defend itself. And beyond that, there is a matter of mathematics. Life is a continuum with two quantum leaps, birth and death. Any interruption in the interim is murder.
So I would think you're a Catholic, you said. You're just defending really the Catholic life principle. The Pope, the current Pope, is from Argentina. I would think he would support you. He has instead criticized you, and you've called him a communist. Why the disconnect?
Well, first, because the Pope plays politics. He has strong political influence, and he has shown a great affinity for dictators such as Castro and Maduro. He is on the side of these bloody dictatorships.
Wait, I'm sorry, Raul Castro's a murderer.
Right? And Fidel Castro was also a murderer.
But the Pope, you believe the Pope has an affinity for Raul Castro?
Sí, exacto. Yes, that's right. He has an affinity for murderous communists. In fact, he won't denounce them. He's quite lenient to them. He's also lenient toward the Venezuelan dictatorship. He's lenient toward the entire left, even when they are true criminals. That's a problem. But he also takes social justice as a central element of his vision. That's difficult, because what is social justice truly? It's stealing the fruits of one person's labor and giving it to someone else. So it means two things. First, it's stealing. The problem with that is that one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not steal. To support social justice is to support stealing. So one problem is that it violates the 10 commandments. The other problem is that it creates unequal treatment under the law. And I don't think it's fair for some people to be rewarded while others are punished, all through the power of the state that wields a monopoly on violence.
So when you look around, it's fascinating to look around the city, Buenos Aires, and the architecture is a mixture of sublimely beautiful buildings and stupendously ugly buildings. And it feels like looking at an archaeological tell where the architecture corresponds to certain political eras. And I wonder if you believe that socialism, leftism, produces ugliness.
This is an initial way to characterize Argentina in terms of the city of Buenos Aires. When you look at its architecture, the architecture of liberalist Argentina is a style that is so fascinating and dazzling. It's the architecture of a glorious times of liberalism in Argentina. The Colón Theater is the best example of this. It is one of the best lyrical theaters in the world, and it is the reflection of a thriving liberalist Argentina that was admired around the world. And then came the buildings that were more square and squat. These were the buildings of the Ministry of Public Works or the Ministry of Social Action, the one down on 9 de Julio Street. It's a truly ugly building with directly Soviet characteristics. In fact, there used to be a statue, they've since removed it, but there was a statue there that looked like this, a man with his hand cupped backward as if accepting a bribe. That's one of the things that the builder included in protest for the number of bribes they demanded of him as he was erecting the building. That's the architecture, squat and ugly, and the only winners involved are those who have business with the politicians. Puerto Madero is an example.
You described the buildings, the leftist buildings, as square and plain and ugly. Why does the left love concrete so much? Your old buildings are built out of stone and plaster, but the newer socialist buildings are all concrete. What is that?
It has to do with leftist values. There are underlying values within leftist ideas: envy, hatred, resentment, unequal treatment under the law, and violence. All that this socialist altruism ends up doing is contaminate the system with incentives that generate poverty. So of course, if you are poor, what you can build is limited by your poverty. This is one reason, everywhere and always, socialism is a violent, murderous, and impoverishing phenomenon. Those are the characteristics of socialism.
Socialism has become ascendant, really, in the United States, as you may have noticed, with the attendant symptoms you described: massive public debt levels, increasing poverty, disorder, crime, filth, and ugliness. Argentina is at the end stage of that. Argentina is now a poor country because of those policies. What advice would you give to Americans having lived it?
Never embrace the ideals of socialism. Never allow yourselves to be seduced by the siren song of social justice. Don't get caught up in that terrible concept that where there is a need, there is a right, but that can't happen on its own. We have to be prepared for this and wage a cultural war every single day. And we have to be careful because they have no problem with getting inside the state and employing Gramsci's techniques, seducing the artists, seducing the culture, seducing the media, or meddling in educational content. You need to be very careful, cut off their funding, and force them into a fair fight. At the same time, we have to raise awareness among the business sector that the masses are necessary. Milton Friedman used to say that the social role of an entrepreneur is to make money, but that's not enough. Part of their investment must include investing in those who defend the ideals of freedom, so the socialists can make no further advances. And if they don't do it, they will get into the state and use the state to impose a long-term agenda that will destroy everything it touches. So we need a commitment from all of those who create wealth to fight against socialism, to fight against statism, and to understand that if they fail to do so, the socialists will keep coming. Because what's the point? Since they try to leech off others without working, they are tireless in their pursuit. Their leitmotif in life is to live off of others. So they never give up on this mechanism to gain control of others' wealth, money, or income. So this battle must be waged unceasingly. We cannot take a day off because when we rest, socialism creeps in.
Donald Trump is running for president again in the United States, as you know. What advice would you give him?
He should continue his fight against socialism because he is one of the few who truly understood that we are fighting socialism, that we are fighting the statists. He understood perfectly that the generation of wealth comes from the private sector. The state does not create wealth, the state destroys it. The state can give you nothing because it produces nothing. And when it attempts it, it does so poorly. So I'd say, if I could humbly offer advice, all I could say would be to double down on his efforts in the same direction, defending the ideals of freedom and refusing to give an inch to the socialists.
Do you see the climate change movement as part of the same socialist agenda?
It is part of the socialist agenda. In fact, what post-Marxism attempts to do, given the clear economic failure after the fall of the Berlin Wall, although socialism actually failed in 1961 when they had to build the wall in the first place. Faced with that defeat, they moved class struggle into other aspects of life. For example, the struggle between black and white, or Black Lives Matter, the entire LGBTQ lobby, everything related to radical feminism. Because remember that the original cause of feminism is rooted in liberalism. The first one to promote it was Jeremy Bentham in the mid-18th century. This agenda also includes the agenda of man against nature, where man is the one supposedly harming nature, when the truth is that the world has had other temperature spikes in the past. It's a cycle that exists regardless of man, and if the prices were truly free, those problems would be fixed easily. We wouldn't need the state to regulate, because every time the state regulates, things get even worse. There's also a darker side to this agenda. It's a murderous agenda, the agenda of abortion. As a consequence of what humans are doing to the planet, they promote the murder of people still in their mother's womb, abortion. This is a policy that has always failed throughout the world, and it's terrible not only by virtue of its failure, but because it is a bloodthirsty policy in which some humans believe they should decide who should live and who should not. It's the utmost expression of hubris. How can a person decide who will live and who will not? I want to say it clearly. The socialists' hands are stained with blood. They always have blood on their hands.
No les alcanzó
Are you,
con...
are you arguing that socialists commit bloodshed because they believe they are God?
Because they believe themselves God. They are heretics. That's why in his last book, Hayek called it the fatal conceit. Because to coordinate this kind of action, everything that you have to know, and that has to do with another article by Hayek called The Use of Knowledge in Society, in which he takes a more scientific and deeper exploration of Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand. What he says is that to implement socialism, the people who do it would have to be omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. That is, they believe they are God. Let me tell you something. They are not God. And what's worse, politicians are such miserable low lives, especially the leftists. They are even below the average population. Who would fake being average? Only those who are below average. This is an agenda of envy. Envy is a capital sin. No good can come from it. No good can come from murder. No good can come from robbery. So going back to Pope Francis, why does he defend an agenda that supports murder, robbery, and envy? It's strange, isn't it?
So why does he? What's the answer?
He is the one who should answer that, because examined in this debate in the light of empirical evidence, he is the one who should be giving explanations as to why he defends an economic system that leads to poverty, misery, violence, and decadence. And if it were up to them, they would destroy the world. That's something he should explain. I'm not a socialist. I'm a libertarian liberal.
You've said that as president of Argentina, you will not do business with China.
Not only will I not do business with China, I won't do business with any communist. I am a defender of freedom, peace, and democracy. There is no room for communists there. There's no room for Putin there. There's no room for Lula there. We want to be the moral lighthouse for our continent. We want to be defenders of freedom, democracy, and diversity, of peace. From within the state, we will not pursue any action with communists or socialists. That doesn't mean that Argentinians can't trade. If they want to trade with China or with Russia or with Brazil, that's up to each Argentinian.
Do you pray for wisdom and guidance?
I know that there are many people who are praying for me. And it brings me joy to know that people go to the Kotel, to the Wailing Wall in Israel, and pray for me. I feel fine. But it's that I'm convinced that what I'm doing is right. Life without freedom is not worth living. I was once asked if I'd be willing to give my life for the ideals of freedom. And I am willing. I want to be an embodiment of that way of living in freedom. I think slavery is a horrifying concept, and I will fight for the ideals of freedom as long as I need to, whatever the consequences may be. Doing the right thing is non-negotiable.
Interesting. Last question. You said there's this enormous state workforce, government workforce in Argentina, but you said that you would not lay them off immediately until you built up the private sector economy because you worried there would be violent protests. Are you worried that there will be violent protests or violence against your supporters over the next month before the election?
I'm not worried because I will govern according to the law. Under my administration, the law will be respected and the people will pay for their mistakes. They should have no reason to complain. They won't be laid off in the first round of reforms. And when the second round of reforms take place, they will be able to leave behind their public sector jobs because they will have an incentive to do so and they will be paid better. It shouldn't be a problem. But if they still want to make trouble, we will enforce the law. And anyone who tries to riot, anyone who breaks the law will be put in prison.
Do you believe law enforcement is on your side?
If not, the justice system wouldn't be working. I will be working to make sure that our justice system is truly independent and can act freely. Anyone who breaks the law and violates the Constitution will have to pay for it. With a justice system that has the political support to be truly independent, I don't see any reason for them not to be on our side. Otherwise, it's not justice.
Javier Milei, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Thanks. That's it.